Hey everyone, it's Thomas here again. So I'm going to be making a video today about 7 reasons why I am a parishioner of the Society of St. Pius X, or otherwise known as SSPX. So for any of you, those of you who do not know, just a bit of a short lesson on what traditional Catholicism actually is, what the SSPX actually is. Uh, in the 1960s and 70s, the Roman Catholic Church made a bunch of reforms allowing for vernacular in the liturgy, uh, reaching out with and ecumenical dialogue with other Christians and world religions, and accepting, to a certain degree, accepting salvation of non-Catholics. Traditional Catholics reject this, pretty much reject it all to various degrees, and how we handle the situation does vary among us. The world's largest traditional Catholic organization, where you can go to practice traditional Catholic faith and the sacraments, is known as the Society of St. Pius X, otherwise known as the SSPX, founded by Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre on November 1st, 1970, where he insisted on training traditional priests in the traditional method, using traditional theology, traditional rites, sacraments, all that. And eventually he was declared excommunicated by the post-Vatican II Catholic Church when he ordained about 4 bishops in a cone, contrary to the wishes of then Pope John Paul II. So that sounds like a rather... So whether you're Protestant or modern Catholic, and you've just heard what I just said, probably quite a few alarm bells will just went off. I'm thinking, oh, all this sounds very wrong. Actually, I disagree. Biblically, I think it is the safe way to go, and I'm going to just give about 7 reasons why I think that. Now, of course, I cannot go into every piece of Catholic theology about why I'm Catholic, or immense detail with using every quote from the Church Fathers, or church statements, or scripture quotes for everything. For everything about my positions as a traditional Catholic. You would be watching this video, and you would be watching it until you died. Basically, it would be such a long list. But I'm just gonna 7 things, biblical quotes, specifically from the Bible, that popped in my head that I found certain major sticking points between especially with modern Catholics. So let's get into it. Seven reasons. 7 biblical reasons why I support the Society of St. Pius X. So number 1, biblically speaking, the Society of St. Pius X is actually right about Ecumenism. So by the way, I'm using more of the newer Protestant translations of the Bible. I will give a Douy Rhiems citation as well. But 2 Chronicles 32:12, we learn about King Hezekiah and the altars. Now, one of the things King Hezekiah did in the Old Testament was the people worshiping God, but they weren't worshiping Him in the way He wanted. They would erect altars to Him outside of Jerusalem, and this was displeasing to God. So Hezekiah went to these shrines to God, not idols, and destroyed them. God praised him for it. Why? Because you're only supposed to worship God in His way. You're only supposed to worship God His way, not other ways. So historically, according to the Church Fathers as well, there is only one true church and one true way of worshiping God. So just as back then, only worship in Jerusalem was acceptable to God, so according to the Church Father St. Cyprian and traditional Catholics today, the only true worship that is acceptable to God is that which is offered in His church, i.e. in the Catholic Church, which is the New Jerusalem. So rites that God did not command to be done, such as Protestant worship services, are not an acceptable way of worshiping God in His eyes, and it is a sin to take part in them. Also, 2 John 1 verses 9 to 10, it says that we are not to. It says that we are not to. Says that we are not to bring these teachers into our homes or listen to them, and this is with other Christians, supposedly. that they're talking about. Well, the doctrine of Jesus. Like, if you don't have a true doctrine of the church, you don't have anything to do with them. So basically, biblically, just as in ancient Israel, you're only supposed to worship God His way, not build altars to God, even if it's the true God, outside of His temple, outside of Jerusalem. That is considered like the reason we believe God did that. The reason why the church fathers believed He did that was because outside of the one true church, worship offered outside of the one true church, i.e., the Catholic Church, is not acceptable, pleasing to God at all. No ecumenism, which kind of leads to my next big question. Thing number 2: the traditional SSPX is right about outside of the Big C, Catholic Church, there is no salvation. So in Galatians 1, verses 8 to 9, it warns people against following another gospel or another Jesus Christ. Now the context of this was other Christians who were saying to observe Jewish holidays and keeping kosher laws. St. Paul said, if you listen to these people, you lose your salvation, and that you will be damned. So think about the differences between Protestantism and Catholicism today. Protestants deny biblical, I'd point out, not just explicitly biblical salvation doctrine, which says that they teach you can be saved by faith alone. Quite a few of them do. Bible condemns that. Or they believe you can be, and there's and that's just one thing. And there are a whole bunch of other things, and that's like a much bigger issue than is or not okay to eat a ham sandwich. So number 2, they are right about outside the Catholic Church there is no salvation from the biblical perspective. If you're looking at any denomination, you're looking for not just Christianity or Jesus Christ. You're looking for Jesus as He taught it, the true faith that Christ taught it. There are many fundamentalist Baptists who say the same thing, Seventh-day Adventists, etc. You know what? They're wrong. I think I say they're wrong about like keeping Sabbath on Saturday, and that's a whole other video, and the rejection of transubstantiation and all that. But they're not wrong about what the stakes are and getting it right or wrong. Biblically, they are correct on that, and I agree with them. Number 3. This is specifically one that has to relate to Protestants again, but they are right about EEX, outside the church there's no salvation, especially as relates to real presence in the Eucharist. So if you don't know what transubstantiation is, again, this is a very layman's term. Transubstantiation is technically a very technical term. It goes into detail about how the change happens, but for layman's terms, the bread and wine becomes the flesh and blood of Jesus Christ, literally. Not symbolically, doesn't represent it, literally. Literally. So if you're a novice, modern post-vacant Catholic, you've listened to any Bible study or Catholic apologetics video, you will eventually, if you do your homework, you'll learn about how in John chapter 6, the Bread of Life dialogue, Jesus is saying that you have to literally eat His flesh and blood, and He means it quite literally. Now, read on to it. Now, if you go there and read towards the end of it, you'll read what the stakes are. In John chapter 6, verse 70, he says that after he loses a bunch of disciples because they don't agree with him on it, He doesn't make it easy for the disciples who have left to come back, just have their own views. Instead, he turns to the apostles and says, "You also want to go away." It is not an option. It is not an optional extra. It is mandatory to believe it according to Jesus Christ, to believe in the real presence if you wish to be saved. And so on that particular score, SSPX, the Society of St. Pius X, is right. And they are right to resist more modern strains within the modern Catholic Church who say, oh, it's an option extra, it's real presence, it's real process, wrong, but it's not a salvation issue. Sorry, our Lord Jesus Christ says otherwise. Number 4, they are right about resisting authority in times of necessity, biblically speaking. So a major point that I would agree point of this would be the story of King David. Most of you, well, a lot of you are probably familiar with the story of King David and Goliath. A lot of you may not be familiar with what happened after that. So basically, David after that went to the service of King Saul. King Saul, who was the legitimate king of Israel, by the way, he was anointed by God's express command by the prophet Samuel. Saul became jealous of him. Eventually started trying to kill him. And King David, who was also chosen by God, fled or had to flee for his life. Otherwise, he'd be killed. And basically, today we would say he lived to live was like a bandit, not harassing his own people, but living out in the woods with a bunch of armed men. And I remember something. You can find these verses in first Samuel from chapter 19 all the way to 2 Samuel and Douy Rhiems. It would be First Kings and 2 Kings respectively. Chapter 19 onwards, 2 Kings if you use Douy Rhiems Bible. But yeah, anyway, if you look at some, I want to make some point a special video just for that story. How relevant it is. They actually told King David. This is actually much stronger in Jewish oral traditions as well, I point out. But it's mentioned as well that they basically told King David, Saul basically complained that David complained to King Saul and said, hey, you're telling me that I'm not an Israelite. Go serve other gods. You're not part of the Israelite people anymore. Kind of like how, suppose they tell, a lot of modern Catholics tell the Society of St. Pius X they're not Catholic. Because you're not listening to what the popes are doing with him. Well, Saul was lawfully anointed king of Israel, and David, out of necessity, had to flee from him as well. He still respected him, recognized him as king, which is more or less the position of Society of St. Pius X. And regardless of what you think of that, that is a legitimate position to hold, because yes, Francis does do nutty things that endanger the faith, and it is right to put the faith first. As you've already seen from my previous Bible quotes. Quotes. And eventually, we know what happened. God was not with Saul, really. Saul was eventually toppled, overthrown, and King David, in his own time, was eventually ascended to the throne of Israel. So yeah, Society of St. Pius biblically does have precedent for the recognized and resist position. You're not supposed to follow leaders down right to the very pit of hell. On that one, for number 5, SSPX is right in following the leaders. Just following leaders is not an excuse. That is not an excuse you can always use to please God. There's a lot of people say yes, they're wrong, but he's the bishop. He's the pope. I should do what he says. I know he's wrong biblically, historically, according to church fathers, church teaching, but I'll just go along because he's pope and I need to obey. That's the main thing what Catholics do. There is a time they get that in the Bible as well. Aaron, who was literally basically co-prophet of God, basically almost for all intents and purposes co-prophet of God, worked for older brother Moses, put in charge by Moses to guide his people of Israel and run the show when Moses was getting the 10 Commandments from God. What happened? Aaron, under pressure from the people, was asked to make a golden calf, which he made, and the people of Israel worshipped. The people of Israel worshipped. You can find this story in Exodus chapter 32. In Exodus 32, what happened? What happened? Eventually, when Moses came down, was Moses sat down. He understood that people just following orders of Aaron, and he accepted it and said, "Just don't do it again," and just quietly blamed Aaron. If you live in opposite land, what happened was when Moses came down, he smashed the idol, lectured Aaron, and he ordered the Levites to go throughout the camp and kill all those who had taken part in the idolatry. God was not happy with what the people did, and we had Aaron's blessing was not a legitimate biblical excuse in the eyes of God. Neither is it an excuse for us to commit sins or to deny or to commit what is basically self-idolatry in the eyes of God. By the way, a lot of rabbinical theologians and even Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI have actually argued that the idol they were worship, the God they're trying to worship when they worship the golden calf, was the God of Israel. So once again, not doing it God's way and doing it your way is considered idolatry. Is considered idolatry in God's eyes, and they were just, and so it was not an excuse. Number 6, they're right that popes can sin and need correction. Galatians 2 verses 11 to 12, Saint Paul the Apostle talks about how he went to Saint Peter and resisted him to the face because he was favoring the Jewish Christians over the Gentile ones, and refused to treat the Gentile ones. Now, Saint Peter was not a heretic. He just had a bunch of cultural scruples, and that was giving scandal. He was giving into too much the way the world scandal, how people were thinking, and it was causing problems. And that was what he was called out on. He wasn't actually guilty of heresy per se, but yeah, popes can sin. They can make mistakes and bend to the way of the world. It is possible, and it is necessary sometimes to call them out on it. And for number 7, communion kneeling on the tongue has more biblical references than communion on the hand. Whenever I was attending the Novus Ordo Mass, I saw people to communion in the hand. This Bible verse this Bible story always in my mind. It's in 2 Samuel 6 verses 6 to 8. That should be Douy Rhiems Bibles. It should be 2 Kings 6 to 8. In it, and I remember there's a scene from an old Bible movie of David and Bathsheba, and they portray it pretty well. They're basically taking the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. David has just come back in the movie. This didn't in the movie he came back with Bathsheba after a night out with her that he shouldn't have been doing. That's not recorded in the Bible too much later. That was not necessarily going on at that same time. I point out, but what the main show is that they're carrying the Ark to Jerusalem. There is a guy who was not supposed to touch the Ark. He saw the Ark tittering and falling, and he said, "Oh, just steady hand the Ark. It's just the Ark." Touched the Ark, and he died. Out of his irreverence. Now, God does not, just because God does not strike us down for stuff like that, does not mean we should still be doing it. Like, biblically, we are living in an era where more and more, as Christians, we are forgetting that God is God. Yes, he wants to be a friend. Yes, he loves us. But we live in a society where we forget that God is sovereign. We forget that he is all-powerful. And it is harming souls at this point. Like, not just among Catholics, but like anything goes wrong. Well, why doesn't God love me anymore? Therefore, he must not be God. It doesn't work that way. He is awesome, powerful, and we can. And if we stand his presence because he's being generous with us, the Ark of the Covenant was just a symbol. The Blessed Sacrament is the real thing. How can we bear to be in the same room as the Blessed Sacrament? How can we not demand? I wonder how Catholics cannot demand that we'll just celebrate it in like Jerusalem or in the Canaculum or in St. Peter's. Pope receives once a year, and he'll says a private mass, and we'll all just pray in that general direction out of fear and awe of how wonderful and awesome God is. And that would be entirely justified. God is generous in inviting us to come to the banquet at all. to be in the same room as him. We do need, and please know the comments about, the early church communion in hand. Well, it was pretty well abandoned by pretty much all the entire Christian world for good reason. It was abandoned by communion in hand was abandoned by pretty much the entire Christian world pretty quickly, and probably for a good reason. Reason. But yeah, biblically, it just has that biblical reference of, it just has a honor that biblical reference there, that God is awesome, God is almighty, and yeah, I want the Catholic faith because it is the faith of the Bible. It is the faith of the early church, and so yeah, I want to receive kneeling on the tongue because I want to remember that when I go before God, I want to need to be reminded that He is all powerful and almighty and all awesome, and I'm nothing compared to Him. Anyway, that's just 7 reasons, more or less off the cuff, uh, why I support the side of St. Pius X. Again, I hope to make some video, each of these is like a video, and each of these reasons at least one video in its own right. Some of them 2 or 3. But yeah. Anyway, stay safe, everyone, and God bless you all.